Well, hey everybody, welcome back. As you can see, it's all 914s all the time here at the Red Barn. The LS car is on jack stands, and the 914 Ferrari is on the quick jacks, and that can only mean one thing. We're back to working on this, and in this episode, we're gonna see if we can get the shifter cables figured out. Okay, sorry about that background noise sometimes. It's raining here at the Red Barn, and with the metal roof, it makes a ton of noise when the rain starts coming down. And anyway, let's get caught up. When we last looked at the shifter, it was all put together and mounted on the base. Now I've taken it apart just to try to prevent, some of the fancier parts from getting scratched. So this is approximately, I'm gonna call this worst case in terms of how far back this portion of the shifter sits. This is where the shift cables enter and have a fixed point. And I gotta get from here, obviously, through the firewall into the transmission. But what's important to note is I got to get these cables to drop and go through the firewall. And then what you wouldn't know until I show you, the challenge is normally, now the 360, by the way, the 360 chassis is a bunch longer than this. It's not that it has a back seat, but it's got room behind the seats to the firewall. And the way they route the shifter cables is they route it under the car or under the engine-ish area and then up into the chassis. So what I've done here is I put a little piece of tape there just to give me a visual of about how much room I have, so when I'm looking at stuff down here I can try to figure out what I wanted to do. And it's off the car, but you might have remembered from when you saw the engine mounts getting, or the engine cradle getting put together, the alternator lives right here. And these shifter cables, as you can see, they can't go in, if the alternator's here, the shifter cables have to go under the car or under the engine. And I don't think I can make them get under the car up and then get back to flat to go into the shifter without putting a bit more bend in the cable than I want. Now they are flexible, but they're not really flexible. They are push-pull cables, so they got some heft to them. So what I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move the alternator to the other side of the motor. Not that big of a deal. Got to make a mount, figure out the belt length and all that. But you can see there are a number of holes in the 914 firewall. This one's for the electrical. It doesn't really matter what happens on, farther over that way because I can't get to it. But if I bring the shifter cables through that hole, and that hole in the firewall, by the way, translates to approximately just inside of this portion of the tunnel. I probably will have to end up making myself a little trough here so that the cables can come up through and then get to flat as they come into here. So I think I can make it work. It's just a question of how tidy a job can I do getting it through there and then make it so it's assemblable and disassemblable without, too much effort. So anyway, that's what we're gonna give a go to. I'm gonna see if I can route something through there now and just get a feel for, how much stuff I have to move, or how much of that tunnel area I'll have to remove. And, oh, by the way, you would also be able to tell, just based on where those cables are, part that mounts to the back of the shifter boss is like here. And if you look up, and they're not even straight, but as I suspected, by the time you straighten those things out, the cables are like they're almost a foot too long, which I knew going in. So our friends at EAG have been kind enough to say that they would make me a custom length set of cables. So the real goal here is to get the cables through there, hooked up to the transaxle, and then I'll mount them to the shifter and just measure back from the mount holes to where I want the mount holes to be, and then that's how much I'll need them to reduce the cable length by. Simple, no? Well, okay, now we have one cable through and sort of connected. And now it's a matter of chasing down getting it to relax as much as possible. You can kind of see it wants to kick this way, right? I'd really like it to come straight out of here, but it's just not going to be able to make it around everything with this distance. So I got a couple options. I'm going to clearance this a bit more because I can open that hole up and I can open up the firewall to give this thing a little bit more flexibility this way. And I'll work out the side to side as best I can. But I think it's gonna work. I mean, there's some squeaking going on here because this isn't tightened down, but you know, that squeak is not because of the cable routing, it's because of this mount is squeaking, but pay no attention to that. It looks like it's working okay. And I am gonna have to open this up to get the other one through because these fittings are a little big. I don't know, you couldn't see it at the high speed move, the time lapse, but pushing it through there, I had to kind of twist it a little bit more than I want to. So I just need to open up clearance, and I didn't want to open this up too much. You can see that we're probably not going to need it to have come this far forward. Need it actually to be a little bit higher. But that gets us, it gets us partway there. And then, not that you can tell, but if we come under here, you can now see, you know, it goes right through that electrical hole, which I think can work. I think can work. The real kicker is this corner of the engine is what's causing it to not be able to move over. Now it's interesting because this mount is for the alternator, so that can go. But I don't know if I can get the cables, if that, you know, getting it up that little bit higher. Well, it might. It gets it inboard a tick more. So maybe I do come up a little higher. But we shall play with that here as we go forward. But that's some progress. So I'm just going to keep chipping away at this and get both of those cables through there, hooked to the transmission, and then with everything hooked up, it's just going to force this to move forward to wherever it needs to end up with the standard cable length. And then it'll just be, as I said, I'll measure back from a mounting point on this to where I want it to end up. Now I could buy myself a little bit of extra room and give up on this perfect alignment, scoot the shifter forward a teeny bit, or if I tilted it, you can see that wouldn't hurt. So I may run it at a slight angle just to ease that cable transition from that position through the firewall. So back at it, and we'll see where we end up. Yay. So both of those are through. It's a bit tight getting through the factory opening for the electrical outlet. So I may end up having to open that up just to make it simpler to feed all this stuff through. And it also may be that it's easier to feed them through from the inside of the car through the firewall and route it that way. But in any case, what we've now got is both cables coming through. Now, what gets hard to do is there's a big rubber connector that's the firewall seal for the factory 360, and the cables are both going through it. It's a tight fit, so it's really difficult to move the cables independently, and it's difficult to get everything routed under the car. So I kind of got to go both places at once and see if I can there we go, get the cables in and get these clips partly down to just hold them in place, and see if I can force, boom, like that. Look at that. That's actually quite nice. I'm not putting those all the way on. I'm just trying to, see, I don't know if you can see that. But before, So you can see it's the mount that's squeaking. The lower bracket is not tightened down. But these cables are just snick, snick, slip, slip, slip. So this routing is going to work. Now you can get a feel for how everything's going to route. Let's go underneath here and look. I'm going to try to get the camera right up in there. You can see where it's interfering on the upper, kind of like, what is that, like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock position is really where the issue is. So I think if I open that part of the firewall up on the inside, that's going to greatly improve where these things can run. So this looks like it's going to work just fine. Okay, a bit of trimming later, you can see that I ended up essentially getting rid of this little lip where the tunnel's spot welded on to the inner firewall, and I can replate that. I'll come up with something to reinforce this just to make up for that. But I did get rid of that interference at the, as I was saying, the 1 or 2 o'clock position. I could still go a little wider here, and I may, but now that's clearanced, and everything's hooked up back here. The cables are back on, and they are clipped into their bracket, routed. Look at the clearance. I mean, the thing barely makes it under the output flange of the transaxle, but that's how they did it. Anyway, and then the cables route up, barely see it, around the motor, and with everything connected, I just allowed it to push the shifter console forward, and I don't know, how good am I? I said it was about 1 foot too long, and if I measure from the center of that hole to the center of the mount hole, the farthest back mount hole, it is literally, I mean, it's like exactly 1 foot. My micrometer is well adjusted, wouldn't you say? But anyway, there you go. So the cables have been routed. Again, minor trimming left to do aside. We now know the amount we need to take out of them, and I'll get those cables ordered up from EAG here in the next couple of days. And we will be all set to get the shifter finally installed and be able to sit in the car and make vroom vroom noises and shift the gears. Awesome, I'm calling that a good day's work. So thanks again for watching, I appreciate it, and hope everybody's having a good time. We'll talk to you all again real soon. Everybody take care, bye-bye.